A cat poisoned by a street gang is rescued by a heartbroken police officer. Miraculously surviving, the feline develops extraordinary abilities that transform the community. A story of second chances where the rejected becomes a hero, proving that even in the darkest circumstances, love can flourish. Prepare yourself for an emotional journey of redemption in the small town of Harmony Creek, Ohio, where simple, colorful houses line uneven cobblestone streets. The summer sun beats down mercilessly on the asphalt in the afternoons. Here, the smell of fresh coffee mingles with the aroma of homemade bread from bakeries opening before dawn. But this apparent tranquility hides stories of lives intertwined by twists of fate. The heat radiating from the concrete contrasts with the coldness of certain human relationships, as if the high temperature couldn't melt the invisible barriers between residents. In a narrow alley near the town square, where the shadows of buildings create a temporary refuge from the scorching heat, a small feline with fur as black as coal scavenges for scraps of food. His amber eyes, watchful and wary, reflect the twilight as his agile paws explore the territory in search of survival. This street cat, thin but resilient, had become part of the urban landscape, invisible to most hurried passers-by who crossed his path daily. On this particularly suffocating afternoon, when the air seemed too thick to breathe, and the silence was broken only by the distant hum of fans running at full blast, the feline's fate began to change. A group of 4 youths, aged between 15 and 17 with bleached hair and baggy clothes betraying their fringe affiliation, approached the alley. Their shrill laughter and restless gazes revealed a search for something to break the boredom of another purposeless day. "Look there, the black cat. They say it's bad luck," commented the tallest one, spitting on the ground as he pointed at the animal. "Only gonna be bad luck for him," replied another, pulling a small vial of murky liquid from his pocket. "Found this in the school lab yesterday. The teacher said it's toxic as hell." Their eyes met in silent communication that sealed the animal's fate. With calculated movements, they mixed the vial's contents with a piece of meat found in the nearby trash and placed it strategically in the cat's path. Hunger, that treacherous advisor to the unfortunate, didn't allow the feline to suspect the unexpected offering. Within minutes, the poison began to take effect. The violent spasms that racked the small animal's body provoked laughter among the youths, who watched the scene like spectators at a macabre show. The black cat, contorting in agony on the dirty alley floor, emitted pained meows that echoed off the exposed brick walls. Satisfied with their prank, the boys walked away, discussing the next target of their gratuitous cruelty, leaving behind a living being fighting against death. At that exact moment, on the other side of the square, Sergeant Mike Riley was conducting his routine patrol. At 48, Mike carried deep marks on his face that time and experience had sculpted. His impeccably pressed uniform and erect posture reflected his unwavering dedication to order, but hid a man whose heart had been hardened by decades of disappointment. Orphaned at 5, he grew up in the foster care system where he learned early on that showing emotion was a sign of weakness. His choice of a career in law enforcement seemed natural for someone seeking in strict adherence to rules, a way to control a world that had always seemed chaotic and unjust. The agonized sound coming from the alley caught his attention. Mike wasn't particularly fond of animals. In fact, he'd never owned a pet in his adult life. But something in that desperate cry penetrated his defenses. Perhaps it was the distant memory of a cat one of his temporary foster families had owned. Perhaps it was just his sense of duty. Regardless of the reason, his firm steps led him to the spot. The scene he found provoked a visceral reaction he hadn't experienced in a long time. The cat, convulsing while white foam formed around its mouth, fought for every breath. For a fleeting instant, Mike saw himself in that helpless animal, fighting alone against forces greater than himself, with no one to witness his pain. "Son of a bitch," he exclaimed through gritted teeth, quickly kneeling. Without a second thought, he removed his outer uniform shirt and carefully wrapped the trembling animal. Contact with the suffering creature sparked an instant, inexplicable connection, as if the abandonment they both knew created a silent language between them. With the cat held firmly against his chest, Mike ran to his cruiser parked near the square. The radio crackled as he informed dispatch he needed to leave for an emergency. Ignoring his superior's query about the nature of the situation, he turned off the radio and sped towards the 24-hour animal hospital located on the edge of town. The 15-minute drive felt like an eternity. The cat, growing weaker, had stopped struggling, but his half-closed eyes still held a spark of life. Mike muttered words of encouragement he never thought he'd say to any living being. "Hang in there, buddy. This isn't how you end things. Not on my watch." When he finally parked in front of the clinic, the animal's breathing was almost imperceptible. He burst through the door, startling the receptionist and the few owners waiting with their pets. "I need help immediately. The cat's been poisoned." His voice, normally controlled and professional, carried a rarely shown urgency. Dr. Emily Carter, the veterinarian on call that night, reacted instantly upon seeing the animal's critical condition. With precise movements, she took the small patient from the officer's hands and rushed him to the emergency room, shouting instructions to her team along the way. Mike, suddenly deprived of the creature that minutes before had been fighting in his arms, felt strangely displaced. "Sir, I need you to tell me exactly what happened," the receptionist asked, approaching with a form. "Are you the owner of the animal?" The question caught him off guard. Owner? He could barely explain why he was there, why he had interrupted his patrol to save a simple street cat. "No, I just found him like this. I think he was poisoned deliberately." For the next 3 hours, Mike remained in the waiting room, unable to return to his patrol as if nothing had happened. He called dispatch, fabricated a story about investigating an anonymous tip, and continued to wait. Other clients came and went, casting curious glances at the uniformed officer whose tense expression betrayed deep concern. When Dr. Carter finally appeared, her expression was serious but not hopeless. "We managed to stabilize him, but the situation is still critical. The next 72 hours will be decisive. Based on the symptoms, we suspect a toxic mixture containing antifreeze, something unfortunately common in cases of intentional poisoning." "Will he make a full recovery?" Mike asked, surprised by his own anxiety for the answer. The veterinarian's gaze softened. "It's impossible to predict with certainty. The poison affected his neurological system. Even if he survives, he'll likely have permanent damage, especially related to motor coordination and balance." Mike nodded, absorbing the information with the same stoicism he showed when receiving news about difficult cases at work. He paid the initial deposit for the treatment, left his personal phone number for contact, and reluctantly returned to duty. Over the next 3 days, a strange routine developed. Mike completed his shift with his usual efficiency, but during breaks and after work, he drove to the animal hospital. He sat beside the recovery cage where the small feline, now connected to tubes and monitors, silently fought for his life. He spoke little, just observed, as if his presence could somehow transmit strength to the debilitated animal. His colleagues at the station noticed the subtle change in his behavior. In a profession where toughness was often mistaken for competence, Mike's apparent weakness for a simple street cat became a topic of locker room conversation. "Riley's going soft. Never thought I'd live to see the day our Iron Mike would shed a tear over a cat," commented one of the rookies while cleaning his gun. "He's past retirement age. When you get too old, you start missing company," replied another, provoking general laughter. Mike heard everything in silence, his impenetrable expression masking the inner turmoil he didn't fully understand himself. Why did he care so much about this cat? Perhaps because, like him, the animal was alone in the world, fighting against injustices it hadn't asked to face. On the 4th day, when Dr. Carter declared the cat out of danger, Mike made a decision that surprised even himself. He would sign the adoption papers. The veterinarian tried to warn him about the challenges he would face. He'll need regular medication and special care. The neurological damage resulted in an unsteady gait, almost as if he were constantly dizzy. There are specialized homes for animals with special needs that could— "I'll take him," Mike interrupted, his voice admitting no argument. "I have enough space." That night, taking the cat to his 3rd-floor apartment in an old building near downtown, Mike faced the reality of his decision. The place, a perfect reflection of his personality, was organized with military precision, not an object out of place, no vibrant colors to suggest life beyond mere existence. The white walls displayed only his police diplomas and a few shooting, competition trophies. On the bookshelf, technical manuals and some crime novels were lined up alphabetically. It was the home of a man who lived by order and discipline. Gently placing the cat on the floor, he watched the animal stagger uncoordinatedly, exploring the new environment with caution. His irregular movements resembled those of a drunk trying to maintain balance, but there was a touching determination in each hesitant step. "I need to give you a name," Mike murmured, preparing a bowl of water and another with the special food recommended by the vet. He thought of his last denied promotion request, the irony of having followed all the rules throughout his career, only to be passed over for others with better political connections. "I'm gonna call you Sarge. Seems like we're both stuck at this." Rank. The first few days of coexistence were a shock for both. Mike, accustomed to solitude and silence, now had to adapt his rigid schedules to the animal's needs. Sarge, in turn, proved stubborn and suspicious, perhaps a reflection of the abuse suffered on the streets. Medication sessions turned into real battles, with the cat hiding in the most inaccessible corners of the apartment when he sensed his guardian approaching with the medicine. One particularly challenging morning, after spending nearly an hour trying to administer the prescribed anti-seizure medication, Mike heard a knock on the door. Annoyed by the interruption, he opened it abruptly to find Mr. Peterson, a man in his 70s who lived in the next apartment. A retired chemistry teacher, he was known in the building as much for his erudition as for his eccentricities. "Good morning, Sergeant Riley. Forgive the intrusion, but I heard the commotion and thought perhaps you might need help. I see you've adopted a companion." The old man's gaze fell on Sarge, who watched the scene from afar, still ruffled from the earlier chase. Mike was about to dismiss the offer when the old man added, "You know, I worked with felines during some university research. I have some experience in persuading them to cooperate." Reluctant but desperate, Mike allowed his neighbor inside. To his surprise, Mr. Peterson didn't try to grab the cat as he had been doing. Instead, he sat on the floor at a respectful distance and began speaking in a melodic, almost whispered tone. Gradually, Sarge approached, curious. With delicate movements that seemed like choreographed steps, the old man managed to administer the medication without any resistance. "It's a matter of body language and patience," he explained, rising slowly. "Felines are sensitive creatures to energy. They sense our anxiety and respond to it." Before Mike could properly thank him, Mr. Peterson mentioned something that would completely change the course of events. "Besides, I know some natural preparations that might complement the conventional treatment. Learned them from my grandmother back in Appalachia. Plants that strengthen the nervous system and aid neurological recovery." The officer, educated in the principles of modern science and skeptical by nature, almost dismissed the suggestion immediately. However, the sight of the still staggering cat, struggling to perform basic actions like jumping onto the sofa, made him reconsider. "What kind of preparations would those be?" he asked, keeping his tone neutral to mask his suspicion. In the following weeks, an unlikely partnership formed between the rigid policeman and the retired teacher. Carefully selected herbs were prepared according to traditional methods and administered alongside conventional medications. Mike, always methodical, kept a detailed journal recording every change in Sarge's behavior. To his surprise and relief, the cat's condition began to improve significantly. Although his gait was still unsteady, Sarge showed greater stability and coordination each day. The apartment routine subtly transformed. Schedules remained precise but now accommodated the needs of a second living being. The once immaculate space began to contain strategically scattered cat toys, small concessions to disorder that would have previously been unthinkable. In the third month after the poisoning, the traditional Harmony Creek Summer Festival, the small town's largest cultural event, mobilized all residents. Colorful booths occupied the town square. The smell of typical fair food permeated the air, and folk music echoed through streets decorated with bunting. Mike, who normally avoided crowds when off duty, surprised himself by considering taking Sarge to experience the festival. It'd be good for his socialization, he justified to himself, settling the cat into the carrier. Exposure to different stimuli might help his neurological recovery. The truth, which Mike was reluctant to admit, was that after months of self-imposed isolation, he felt a strange desire to participate in community life again. Sarge would become his perfect excuse. The officer's arrival at the fair with a cat caused immediate curiosity. Children approached asking to see the animal. Elderly people smiled, recognizing the usually serious man now carrying a pet carrier adorned with paw print stickers, a gift from Mr. Peterson that Mike hadn't had the heart to remove. "Is it true you saved him after he was poisoned, Sergeant Riley?" asked a girl of about 8, her eyes shining with admiration. Mike felt uncomfortable with the sudden attention. "Yeah, he got lucky. Right place, right time." It was during this interaction that the commotion began. A woman's desperate cries cut through the festive atmosphere. "My son! I can't find my son. Has anyone seen Leo? 5 years old, green t-shirt with a dinosaur." Instinctively, Mike placed the carrier on the ground to help search for the missing child. As he turned to speak with the panicked mother, he didn't realize the carrier latch wasn't fully closed. Sarge, sensing the agitation, pushed the small door open with his head and escaped. "Damn it!" Mike exclaimed upon noticing the escape. Torn between helping find the boy and retrieving his cat, he felt a moment of genuine panic. Sarge, still motor impaired, could easily be trampled in the crowd or get lost for good. What happened next would become local folklore. Sarge, staggering between the legs of confused adults, determinedly headed towards a seemingly abandoned craft booth at the back of the fair. Mike, following the trail of surprised exclamations from people noticing the unbalanced cat, arrived just in time to see Sarge disappear under the stall's canvas. Bending down to retrieve the animal, Mike heard a soft sob. There, hidden among boxes of merchandise and covered by a piece of colorful fabric, was the lost boy Leo. Hugging his knees and trembling with fear, Sarge had snuggled up beside the child, purring as if trying to comfort him. "Hello, Leo. Your mom's looking for you," Mike said softly, using the tone he'd learned to use with Sarge when the cat was scared. "Looks like you've met my friend Sarge." The boy, wiping tears with his small hands, managed a small smile. "He makes a little tractor noise." Minutes later, when Mike emerged from the booth carrying both the boy and the cat, he was greeted by emotional applause from the gathered crowd. Leo's mother, between tears of relief, couldn't stop thanking him. Someone shouted, "Sergeant Riley's cat found the boy." The news spread quickly through the small town, growing and becoming embellished as only happens in communities where everyone knows each other. Within days, the story of the detective cat had become a local urban legend. Children drew Sarge wearing superhero capes. Shopkeepers asked Mike on his patrol route, "Where's your feline partner, Sergeant?" For a man who had always valued anonymity and discretion, the sudden notoriety was disconcerting. However, Mike couldn't deny that something was changing within him. The walls carefully built over decades were beginning to show small cracks. It was during this period that Mrs. Gable, the respected widow of the town's former police chief, sought him out after his shift. With her 80 well-lived years and enviable lucidity, she was a matriarchal figure in the community, whose opinion carried more weight than many written laws. "Sergeant Riley, forgive my intrusion, but I need your help," she declared, sitting in the chair opposite Mike's desk in the nearly empty station. "It's about my grandson, Ethan." Ethan Miller, 17, had lost his father, Mrs. Gable's only child, in a car accident 3 years prior. Since then, he had become increasingly rebellious and distant. Recently, he had started skipping school and coming home smelling of cigarettes and occasionally alcohol. "I found this in his jacket pocket," the lady said, placing a small empty vial, similar to the one that had contained the poison given to Sarge, on the desk. When I questioned him, he became aggressive, said I didn't understand anything about his life. Mike felt a chill of recognition. Police instinct, combined with the memory of the dying animal in the alley, sent warning signals he couldn't ignore. Carefully examining the vial, he noticed residue of a substance similar to what the vet had identified in Sarge's system. "Mrs. Gable, I'll help you, but I need you to understand. If your grandson is involved in illegal activities, especially poisoning animals, there will be consequences." The elderly woman nodded gravely. "I understand perfectly, Sergeant. If Ethan did something wrong, he must learn his lesson. But I also believe a young person shouldn't be defined by their mistakes, but by how they choose to correct them." Those words resonated deeply with Mike. How many youths had he arrested over the years without ever questioning the circumstances that led them to crime? How many chances for redemption were denied in the name of cold law enforcement? In the following days, Mike began a discreet investigation. He discovered that Ethan hung out with the same group responsible for poisoning Sarge, youths mostly from troubled families, led by Jake Thompson, the son of an influential councilman known for solving problems for friends and political supporters. Instead of confronting the teenagers directly or arresting them, as he would have done without hesitation months earlier, Mike conceived a different approach. Using his contacts at City Hall and the goodwill recently acquired thanks to Sarge's fame, he proposed an educational program in schools about respect for animals and community responsibility. Project Sarge, as it was named, invited students of all ages to interact with the now famous cat, while learning about the consequences of animal abandonment and abuse. Mike, overcoming his aversion to public speaking, told the story of how he found the poisoned feline and how the experience transformed his perspective on compassion and second chances. During one of these presentations at the school Ethan attended, Mike noticed something curious. Sarge, normally sociable during these events, began acting strangely. His fur bristled, and he seemed determined to move away from certain students, precisely Jake Thompson's group. After the session, while packing up the educational materials, Mike observed Sarge approach a forgotten backpack and exhibit the same agitated behavior. Intrigued and making sure he was alone, he examined the contents. Among books and notebooks, he found a small vial identical to the one Mrs. Gable had shown him. The hypothesis formed instantly in his trained mind. Sarge had developed a special sensitivity to the substance that nearly killed him. The traumatic experience resulted in an unusual ability to detect the chemical compound by smell. Consulting Dr. Carter and Mr. Peterson, Mike confirmed that such a phenomenon, though rare, was scientifically plausible. Some animals surviving poisoning developed hypersensitivity to toxic substances, like an evolutionary defense mechanism. This discovery opened a new chapter in the partnership between man and cat. With guidance from the chemistry teacher and special authorization from the police chief, who initially laughed at the idea but later witnessed a convincing demonstration, Mike began training Sarge as an unofficial detector. The feline learned to signal when he identified certain chemical substances, receiving treats as rewards. The 5th month after the rescue marked the peak of the community transformation, initiated by that chance encounter in the alley. During the traditional county fair, an event attracting visitors from neighboring towns and bringing together everyone from the youngest to the oldest for week-long celebrations, Mike and Sarge informally patrolled the grounds. The festive atmosphere, with crackling bonfires lighting the night while couples performed square dances to the sound of accordions and fiddles, was suddenly interrupted when several people began feeling ill almost simultaneously. The initial hypothesis was food poisoning, but the speed and severity of symptoms suggested something more serious. Mike, passing near the food stall where the victims had eaten, noticed Sarge's agitated behavior. The cat, resting comfortably in his custom basket with wheels, a creative solution by Mr. Peterson for easier long-distance travel, started showing the characteristic signs indicating the presence of the chemical substance he'd learned to detect. Following his instinct and the feline's guidance, Mike identified accidental contamination in a specific batch of caramel sauce. A chemical drum used for industrial cleaning had been improperly reused to store ingredients. Thanks to the early detection, the number of affected people was limited, and all recovered fully after hospital treatment. This incident definitively solidified the unlikely duo's reputation. Police Chief Evans, who had always seen Mike as a good cop, but lacking leadership potential due to his solitary temperament, called him into his office the following week with an unexpected proposal, coordinating a new experimental community policing program, using the sergeant's and his cat's popularity as a bridge between the police force and citizens. "It's the same promotion I denied you 6 months ago, Riley," admitted the chief, a burly man with a neatly trimmed gray mustache. "But back then, you didn't demonstrate the interpersonal skills needed for the job." Mike accepted the challenge, aware of the irony. All the recognition he had obsessively sought throughout his career arrived now, not for his strict adherence to rules, but for an impulsive act of compassion that contradicted everything he believed he represented. Parallel to this professional advancement, Mr. Peterson proposed formalizing a scientific study on Sarge's sensory abilities. At 72, the retired teacher discovered a new purpose in his life, connecting with former university colleagues and designing research protocols that could benefit other animals with similar conditions. However, as often happens when someone rises quickly, envy and resentment manifested in the shadows. The group of youths led by Jake Thompson particularly felt threatened. If the detective cat continued identifying illicit substances, how long would it take until their other activities, petty theft, selling contraband, intimidating shopkeepers, were discovered? The first retaliation came in the form of a shattered windshield. Mike found his car vandalized in the station parking lot, with a clear message scratched into the paint: "Watch your pet cat, or he might have a relapse." The threat, instead of intimidating him as intended, awakened a fierce determination in the officer that surprised even himself. The Mike of 6 months ago would have handled the situation strictly by protocol: file a report, start a formal investigation, collect evidence. The current Mike felt something more visceral: the need to protect not only Sarge but all vulnerable youths who could be negatively influenced by Jake's group. Intensifying his efforts with the educational project, Mike began specifically inviting teenagers considered problematic to special activities. Ethan, Mrs. Gable's grandson, was one of the first to show genuine interest, particularly after Mike invited him to help with the special care Sarge still required. "Why are you doing this? Why do you care?" the teenager asked one afternoon, while assisting with the cat's physical therapy, simple exercises designed to strengthen his motor coordination. Mike reflected before answering, searching for words, to express feelings he had only recently begun to recognize in himself. "Because everyone deserves a second chance. Me, you, Sarge. We all make mistakes. What defines our character isn't the mistake itself, but what we choose to do afterward." Those simple but profound words resonated with the young man. In the following weeks, Ethan began gradually distancing himself from Jake's group, which did not go unnoticed by the leader. The pressure intensified, culminating in a confrontation in the school parking lot that would have resulted in physical violence if not for Mike's timely intervention as he was giving a presentation there. The situation reached its critical point when Mike discovered, through careful investigation, that Jake's father, Councilman Davis, was involved in schemes skimming medications from the city hospital. The substance that had poisoned Sarge months earlier was, in fact, a chemical byproduct of these illegal operations. The moral dilemma presented was overwhelming. Reporting the councilman meant confronting not only his political power but also compromising Jake's future and potentially destroying the community program that was positively transforming so many lives. Remaining silent would violate everything he stood for as a police officer. During this period of agonizing indecision, Sarge fell ill again. The vets confirmed what Mike secretly feared: the long-term effects of the initial poisoning, temporarily controlled, were manifesting again as kidney complications. The stress of the routine as a detective cat, although cognitively stimulating for the animal, had accelerated the physical toll. "He needs absolute rest," explained Dr. Carter, her voice betraying the concern she tried to mask professionally. "No presentations, no training, just medication, controlled diet, and tranquility." That night, watching Sarge sleep restlessly in his special bed, Mike confronted a disconcerting truth. His desire for justice was potentially compromising the well-being of the being who had saved his forgotten humanity. In his determination to transform his community, he had repeated the same mistake he'd made throughout his career, placing abstract principles above real connections. The epiphany was interrupted by a hesitant knock on his door. Ethan, with serious expression and dark circles under his eyes betraying sleepless nights, waited in the hallway. "We need to talk, Sergeant Riley, about Jake, his dad, and about what happened to Sarge that day." The confession that followed, detailing how the group had poisoned the cat as a test of courage, how Jake gradually dragged his friends into increasingly serious activities, how the father used his influence to protect his son, provided the final pieces of the puzzle Mike had been trying to assemble. "Why are you telling me this now?" Mike asked, his neutral voice masking the emotional storm within. The teenager's gaze landed on Sarge, asleep on the sofa. "Because he didn't give up on surviving, even when everything indicated he should. And because you didn't give up on him, even when it would have been easier, I guess. Maybe I deserve that chance too." In the following days, Mike faced the toughest decision of his career. Using the information provided by Ethan and carefully collected evidence, he formalized a complaint against Councilman Davis, not for the specific poisoning of Sarge, but for the medication skimming scheme. In return, he negotiated an agreement with the district attorney's office that would allow Jake and the other youths to participate in an intensive rehabilitation program instead of facing the traditional juvenile justice system. The legal process unfolded slowly, as is typical of the judicial system. However, deeper and more significant changes were occurring in the community. Inspired by Sarge's story, now widely publicized in regional newspapers, the city inaugurated its first municipal animal shelter. Volunteers, many of them young people, who previously found no purpose in their lives, took turns caring for rescued dogs and cats. In the 9th month after the poisoning, during the Founders' Day celebration, an event combining historical commemoration with local cultural traditions, what many would call a small secular miracle occurred. Jake, fulfilling his community service working at the animal shelter, approached Mike during the parade. "My dad is going to plead guilty," he reported, his voice a mixture of shame and relief. "Said he doesn't want me carrying the weight of his mistakes. And I wanted to apologize personally for what we did to Sarge, for the car, the threats. I know words don't fix anything, but..." Mike, observing the young man who seemed to have aged years in just a few months, extended his hand. Sometimes, acknowledging the mistake is the first step to fixing it. When the 1-year anniversary of that fateful night in the alley arrived, the town organized a special celebration. In the town square where it all began, hundreds gathered, from school children who had participated in Project Sarge to elderly residents who normally didn't attend public events. The mayor, sensing a political opportunity but also genuinely touched by the story, officially declared that date Animal Rights Awareness Day in the municipality. In a symbolic ceremony, Sarge, now recovered from his relapse thanks to intensive care and Mr. Peterson's herbal remedies, received an honorary citizen medal from the city, the first awarded to a non-human. Mike, formally promoted to lieutenant in charge of the community policing department, smiled publicly for the first time in years as he held the cat for the official photo. His apartment, once austere as a barracks, gradually transformed. The white walls now displayed dozens of colorful drawings by children from the project, depicting Sarge in various imaginary adventures. An entire bookshelf was dedicated to books on animal behavior, veterinary medicine, and cat lore. Recommendations from Mr. Peterson that Mike devoured in his spare time. One Sunday morning, exactly 1 year and 2 weeks after the rescue, Mike made a spontaneous decision that would have been unthinkable for the man he once was. Visiting the municipal shelter for dying, a routine inspection, his eyes fell upon a marmalade female cat, about 3 years old, recently rescued after being abandoned by a family moving out of town. "She's quite independent but affectionate when she decides you deserve her attention," explained the volunteer, an elderly woman who dedicated her mornings to the shelter. "Looking for a partner for your famous detective?" Mike observed the animal for a few moments, noticing her attentive eyes and confident posture, so different from the fragility that had characterized Sarge initially. "Yes," he replied with conviction. "I think it's time Sarge had a partner. I'll call her LT." That same evening, as Mr. Peterson, Mrs. Gable, Ethan, and other newfound friends gathered in his apartment for a community potluck, where dishes, typical of the region, were served amidst stories and laughter, Mike observed his new reality with a clarity only profound transformation provides. Sarge, lying comfortably in his privileged bed near the window, watched the scene with that enigmatic expression characteristic of felines. Beside him, still cautious but clearly interested, LT explored her new territory. On the opposite wall, a recent photograph showed the complete team of the community project: police officers, veterinarians, teachers, students, and volunteers, all united by a cause that transcended their differences. "You know what's most incredible?" commented Mr. Peterson, approaching with a cup of herbal tea in one hand and a special treat for Sarge in the other. "How a single act of cruelty, when confronted with genuine compassion, could generate so much kindness in a chain reaction." Mike nodded, his words scarce as always, but his eyes communicating an emotion he no longer feared showing. A single poisoned cat, a single moment of impulsive empathy, had triggered a transformation not only in his personal life, but in an entire community. Observing the people he now considered family, an unlikely family formed not by blood ties, but by compassionate choices, Mike finally understood what he had been searching for his entire life. Not perfect order, not absolute control, but authentic connections based on shared vulnerability and mutual respect. And Sarge, as if reading his thoughts, blinked slowly in his direction. That gesture, cat lovers recognize as the deepest sign of trust and affection in the silent language of cats.